3 days had passed since the battle, and the station had transformed from a war zone back into a place of diplomacy as human and Velthrani representatives gathered once again to discuss the future. But everything had changed since that first hopeful meeting, and everyone in the conference chamber knew that the old ways of thinking could never fully return. Counselor Yumseo stood at the window, watching the unyielding vigil patrol the outer perimeter. Its weapons now powered down, but its presence still a constant reminder of what had transpired in this system. The captured Kreth prisoners had been cooperative. Once they realized that their captors intended to treat them fairly and use their testimony to expose the Dominion's crimes rather than simply executing them for their attempted attack, their confessions had already been transmitted to a dozen neutral worlds, and the response from the galactic community had been everything. Admiral De Young had predicted species that had long suspected the Kreth of atrocities now had proof, and alliances were forming against the Dominion that would have seemed impossible just weeks before. "You seem troubled," said a voice from behind, and Yunseo turned to find Elder Hana approaching with the slow dignity of her advanced years. "I am reconsidering everything I thought I knew," the counselor admitted, "and finding that certainty is far more difficult to maintain than I once believed." Hana nodded and joined Yunseo at the window, her ancient eyes reflecting the distant lights of the human fleet. "I have been thinking about something," the Admiral said. She offered, "about how the Velthrani have been protected by geography rather than by the inherent safety of our pacifist philosophy." "It is a difficult truth to accept," Yunseo agreed, "but perhaps not an entirely unwelcome one." Hana continued, surprising the counselor with the direction of her thoughts. "Because it means that our ideals are not wrong, only incomplete." She turned to face Yunseo with an expression that mixed wisdom with something that looked almost like hope. "We have always believed that peace comes from understanding and cooperation, from reaching out to others and finding common ground that makes violence unnecessary. And we were not wrong about that, Counselor. We simply failed to account for those who refuse to seek common ground, those who see cooperation as weakness and understanding as an opportunity for exploitation. The humans have shown us what we were missing," Yunseo said slowly, beginning to understand what the elder was suggesting. "They have shown us that peace requires defenders," Hana confirmed, "that the dream of a galaxy without war can only survive if there are those willing to fight for it. We have been the diplomats and the mediators for thousands of years, but we have never been the protectors because we have never needed to be. Now we have met a species that has always needed to be, and perhaps together we can be something greater than either of us could be alone." The final negotiation session brought together the full delegations from both species, along with Admiral Daeun and several other military leaders who had been instrumental in the battle against the Kreth. The atmosphere was different now, more honest and more real than the careful formality of their first meetings. "We came here seeking friendship," Counselor Yunseo began, addressing both delegations with a voice that carried new weight and conviction. "And we found something far more complex than we expected. We found a species that dreams of peace as deeply as we do, but who has learned through bitter experience that dreams must be defended if they are to survive. We found warriors who fight not for conquest or glory but for protection, who capture enemies rather than slaughter them, who turn prisoners into witnesses and evidence into weapons against tyranny." The human delegates listened with expressions of cautious hope, uncertain how the Velthrani would ultimately judge what they had witnessed. "We came here as teachers," Yunseo continued, "prepared to guide a young species into the galactic community and show them the path to enlightened civilization. But we have been the students, and the lesson we have learned has been humbling." Yunseo turned to face Admiral Daeung directly, speaking now to him rather than to the assembled delegates. "The Velthrani offer humanity not patronage but partnership. Not guidance, but alliance between equals who have much to learn from each other. We will share our knowledge of diplomacy and mediation, our centuries of experience in building bridges between species, and in return, we ask that you share your strength, your willingness to stand as protectors for those who cannot protect themselves. Admiral De Jong rose from his seat and crossed the chamber to stand before the counselor, his bearing formal but his eyes warm with genuine emotion. Humanity accepts this partnership with gratitude and with honor, he said, and we pledge that no ally of Earth will ever stand alone against the predators of this galaxy. He extended his hand in the human gesture of agreement, and Yun Seo took it without hesitation. Together, the Admiral continued, we will show the galaxy that peace and strength are not opposites but partners, that the desire for cooperation and the ability to defend it can exist in the same heart. The chamber erupted in applause from both delegations, and for the first time since the Serenity's promise had entered this system, Counselor Yun Seo felt genuine hope for the future later. As the celebrations wound down and preparations began for the long journey home, Minjun found the counselor once again standing at a window watching the stars. The council will have questions, the young analyst observed. Many will not understand why we have allied ourselves with a species that brought hidden weapons to our first meeting. Then we will help them understand. Yun Seo replied calmly, we will show them what the humans showed us, that there are threats in this galaxy that cannot be reasoned with, and must be faced with strength as well as wisdom. And if they refuse to accept it, Yun Seo smiled, an expression that carried new depths of understanding. Then we will do what the humans did. We will protect them anyway, because that is what it truly means to believe in peace. Outside the window, the unyielding vigil began to move, taking up position alongside the Serenity's promise as both vessels prepared for the journey to Velthrani space. It was a small gesture, but a significant one. A human battleship escorting a Velthrani diplomatic vessel, not as a show of force, but as a promise. The galaxy watched and wondered at this strange new alliance between ancient pacifists and young warriors, between those who had always preached peace and those who had always prepared for war, and somewhere in the darkness between stars, the Kreth Dominion watched as well and began to understand that everything had changed. Humanity had announced itself to the galaxy, not with words alone but with deeds. Not with promises, but with protection. Not with hope, but with the strength to make hope meaningful. The message spread across every world and every species, carried in a phrase that would define the new era dawning among the stars. Humanity comes in peace, but peace has teeth. The station erupted into controlled chaos as human personnel rushed to battle stations with a discipline that spoke of endless drills and careful preparation. Counselor Yun Seo and the Velthrani delegation were escorted to a reinforced observation deck where they could watch the approaching conflict while remaining protected from potential harm. Admiral De Jong had already departed for the unyielding vigil, his calm demeanor never wavering, even as he prepared to lead his people into battle against an enemy that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries. Kreth fleet composition confirmed, announced a young human officer monitoring the tactical displays. 12 warships, including 2 heavy cruisers and multiple support vessels. The holographic projection showed the enemy formation as it swept through the outer system, their trajectory leaving no doubt about their intentions. They were coming for the station, for the Velthrani delegation, and for any hope of alliance between humanity and the peaceful species who had come to them in friendship. They outnumber our revealed forces nearly 2 to 1, Minjun observed, his analytical mind already calculating the odds of survival. But even as he spoke, something remarkable began to happen in the space around the station. More ships began to shimmer into existence as cloaking fields dropped throughout the defensive perimeter, vessel after vessel appearing where only moments before there had been empty void. The original 12 human ships had become 20, then 30, then more still as the true size of the hidden fleet revealed itself. They were not just hiding from us, Elder Hannah whispered in amazement. They were hiding from the Kreth as well, on the tactical display. The Kreth formation visibly faltered as their sensors registered the sudden appearance of a fleet that should not have existed. Their confident advance slowed as commanders, who had expected easy prey, found themselves facing a force that matched and perhaps exceeded their own attention Kreth vessels. Admiral De Young's voice broadcast across all frequencies, calm and steady and utterly without fear. You have entered human space with hostile intent, and your weapons are armed for combat. You will power down your weapons and prepare for boarding, or you will be destroyed. The response from the Kreth was immediate and predictable as their fleet accelerated toward the station with weapons charging for a devastating first strike. They had come too far and invested too much to turn back now, and their commanders clearly believed that numerical superiority would carry the day regardless of how many human ships had appeared. They were wrong. The unyielding Vigil surged forward to meet the enemy, its massive engines flaring bright against the darkness as it led to human formation into battle. Behind it came the rest of the fleet in a coordinated assault that moved with the precision of a single organism, each ship knowing exactly where to be and what to do. The first Kreth cruiser died before it could fire a single shot, caught in a crossfire from 3 human destroyers that tore through its shields and gutted its reactor core. The explosion lit up the void like a new star, and for a moment, the Kreth advance faltered again as the reality of their situation became impossible to deny. "They fight like demons," whispered one of the Velthrani delegates, unable to look away from the display, showing human ships weaving through enemy fire with almost supernatural agility. But Counselor Yunseo noticed something else, something that the others had missed in their fascination with the sheer destructive power on display. The humans were not fighting to kill. Their weapons targeted engines and weapons arrays and shield generators, crippling Kreth vessels rather than destroying them outright. When enemy ships went dark and began to drift, human boarding parties launched immediately, breaching hulls and overwhelming crews with non-lethal weapons designed to capture rather than slaughter. They had taken prisoners, Yunseo said aloud, the realization shifting everything they thought they understood about humanity once again. The battle lasted less than an hour, though it felt like an eternity to the Velthrani, watching from the safety of the observation deck. When it was over, 3 Kreth vessels had been captured intact, their crews subdued and secured by human marines, who treated their prisoners with a respect that seemed to confuse the enemy soldiers. The remaining Kreth ships had fled into hyperspace, their formation shattered and their confidence destroyed by an enemy that should have been primitive and helpless. Admiral De Young returned to the station as a conquering hero, though he accepted the admiration of his crew with a quiet humility that seemed at odds with the violence he had just orchestrated. "You could have destroyed them all," Counselor Yunseo said when they met again in the conference chamber, now serving as a command center for the aftermath of the battle. "We could have," De Young agreed. "And there was a time in human history when we would have done exactly that." He led the counselor to a display showing images from the captured Kreth vessels, data files and manifests and records that painted a horrifying picture of the enemy's true intentions. "Look at this," he said, highlighting a particular document that made Yunseo's blood run cold. It was a cargo manifest for the Velthrani delegation, listing each member by name and species, and estimated value on the slave markets of the Kreth Dominion. Next to the names were notes about preferred methods of breaking their spirits and training them for service, written in the clinical language of those who viewed living beings as nothing more than merchandise. "They plan to sell you," Admiral De Young said quietly, "and they plan to strip Earth's oceans for resources and our population for labor. This is what we face, Counselor. This is the enemy that your peaceful diplomacy cannot reach. Yunseo stared at the manifest, showing their own name and the price that had been placed on their freedom, and felt something fundamental shift in their understanding of the galaxy. Why capture them alive? They finally asked. Why risk your own soldiers to take prisoners when destruction would have been so much easier? The Admiral smiled, and for the first time Yunseo saw something in his eyes that looked almost gentle. Because evidence is more powerful than vengeance, he said. And because dead enemies cannot testify to their crimes before the galactic courts. He gestured to the captured vessels, visible through the window. Their hulls now marked with human insignia. These ships and their crews will prove to the galaxy what the Kreth truly are. And their testimony will do more damage to the Dominion than 1,000 destroyed warships ever could. Counselor Yunseo looked at the human admiral and saw him clearly for the first time. Not as a warrior or a diplomat, but as something far more complex. You fight to protect, they said slowly, and you capture to expose. And you prepare for war so that peace might actually be possible. Now you understand, Admiral De Jong replied. Now you see what humanity has learned from our long and bloody history. Peace is not weakness, but peace without strength is just another word for surrender. The conference chamber had transformed from a place of hopeful diplomacy into something far more somber as the Volfrani delegation struggled to process what they had witnessed outside the windows. The unyielding vigil hung in space like a sleeping predator, its dark hull absorbing the light of distant stars while its weapons, arrays pointed silently into the void. Counselor Yunseo had not spoken since the battleship revealed itself. Their mind racing through centuries of Volfrani diplomatic history, searching for any precedent that might guide them through this unprecedented situation. You must understand our position, Admiral De Jong said, breaking the heavy silence that had fallen over the room. Humanity has walked a difficult path to reach the stars, and we carry the scars of that journey with us wherever we go. What path could possibly justify bringing weapons of war to a peaceful first contact? Elder Hannah demanded, a voice sharp with an anger that surprised even herself. The Admiral did not flinch at her tone, but instead activated another display showing images that made several members of the delegation look away in horror. Cities burned beneath alien skies while strange ships rained destruction from above, and bodies lay scattered across landscapes that had clearly once been beautiful before violence had transformed them into graveyards. These are not human worlds, De Jong explained quietly. These are the homeworlds of species that trusted the galaxy to protect them. Species that believed in peace so completely that they never prepared for war. The Kreth, Minjun whispered, recognizing the distinctive design of the attacking vessels from the intelligence reports. They had been shown earlier, the Kreth and others like them, the Admiral confirmed. Predators who see peaceful species not as potential friends, but as easy prey. Resources to be harvested and populations to be enslaved. Counselor Yunseo finally found their voice, though it emerged rough and uncertain from a throat tight with emotion. The Volfrani have maintained peace across dozens of star systems for thousands of years. They said, we have resolved conflicts and prevented wars through diplomacy and mutual understanding, not through threats and hidden weapons, and we admire you for that accomplishment. Admiral De Jong replied with what seemed like genuine respect. But we must ask you an uncomfortable question. Counselor, he leaned forward across the table, his eyes intense and searching. In all those thousands of years, have the Volfrani ever faced a true predator species? One that could not be reasoned with or negotiated with? One that saw your peace not as a virtue to be respected, but as a weakness to be exploited? The silence that followed his question was answer enough. Yunseo thought of Volfrani history. of the conflicts they had resolved and the alliances they had brokered, and realized with dawning horror that the Admiral was right. Every species the Velthrani had ever dealt with had been fundamentally reasonable, capable of understanding that cooperation benefited everyone more than conflict. They had never encountered anything like the Kreth, because their territory had never extended into regions where such predators hunted. Your peace has been protected by geography, De Jong said gently. By the accident of where your species evolved and the paths your expansion happened to take. You cannot know that, Elder Hannah protested. Though her voice had lost its earlier certainty, we know it because we have studied the galactic records you shared with us, the Admiral replied. And we know it because humanity was not so fortunate in our own history. He stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the fleet that surrounded the station. Earth's history is written in blood, he continued, not because humans are monsters, but because we evolved on a world where peace was never guaranteed and safety had to be fought for every single day. We learned early that kindness without strength invites exploitation, that mercy without power becomes surrender, that the desire for peace means nothing if you cannot defend it. Counselor Yun Seo rose from their seat and joined the Admiral at the window, standing beside him as they both looked out at the stars. You believe the Kreth will attack, Yun Seo said. Not as a question, but as a statement of understanding. The Kreth scouts at the edge of this system have been tracking your vessel since before you arrived, De Jong confirmed. They know that a successful alliance between humanity and the Velthrani would create a power block strong enough to threaten their expansion. They cannot allow that to happen, which means they will try to stop it by capturing your delegation and destroying any evidence of friendly contact between our peoples and your hidden fleet. Yan Sao said slowly, beginning to understand at last. It was never meant to threaten us. It was meant to protect you, the Admiral said, turning to meet the counselor's eyes, and to protect us, and to send a message to the Kreth that humanity does not abandon those who come to us in friendship. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implications that would take time to fully process. We could have told you from the beginning, De Jong admitted. But we feared that knowledge of the Kreth presence would poison these negotiations before they even began. We wanted you to see us as we truly are. A species that dreams of peace, but prepares for war. That offers friendship with one hand while holding a sword in the other. Counselor Yun Seo was quiet for a long moment, weighing everything they had learned against everything they had believed. The Velthrani way had always been one of trust and openness, of believing in the fundamental goodness of intelligent beings and working to bring out the best in every species they encountered. But the humans were showing them another way, one that did not reject peace, but simply acknowledged that peace required protection. Your people carry a heavy burden, Yan Seo finally said, to always be ready for violence while hoping it never comes. It is a burden we have carried since before we were truly human, Admiral De Jong replied, and one we will continue to carry for as long as predators exist in this galaxy. But we do not carry it alone, Counselor, and if you will have us, we would be honored to stand beside the Velthrani and help carry your burdens as well. Before Yun Seo could respond, an alarm began to sound throughout the station, its sharp tone cutting through the moment of connection that had formed between them. Admiral, a voice called urgently over the communicator. Kreth warships dropping out of hyperspace at the system's edge. 12 vessels on attack vector. De Jong's expression hardened into something cold and focused as he turned toward the door. It seems the Kreth have made their decision, he said. Now we must make ours. The Velthrani diplomatic vessel Serenities. Promise drifted through the darkness of space with the quiet confidence of a species that had never known war in living. Memory Counselor Yun Seo stood at the observation deck and watched the distant yellow star grow. brighter as they approached what the galactic records called Sol System, home to a species that had only recently discovered faster-than-light travel and sent their first tentative signals into the cosmic void. The Velthrani had answered those signals as they had answered hundreds before, with open arms and peaceful intentions and the promise of galactic brotherhood. "We are receiving their transmission now," announced Minjun, the young analyst who served as Yun's assistant and had proven himself invaluable. On 3 previous first contact missions, Yunseo turned from the window and crossed the polished floor to the communication station where holographic displays flickered with incoming data streams. "They call themselves humans," Minjun continued, his slender fingers dancing across the controls as he translated the message. "And they welcome us to their system with great enthusiasm and express hope that this meeting will mark the beginning of a lasting friendship between our peoples." The words were almost too perfect, too exactly what the Velthrani expected to hear from a young species eager to join the galactic community. Yunseo had conducted enough first contacts to recognize the careful diplomacy of a species putting their best foot forward, hiding their fears and uncertainties behind a mask of confidence. "Respond with our standard greeting," Yunseo instructed, "and inform them that we look forward to meeting their representatives in person." The journey to the inner system took several hours, during which the Velthrani delegation prepared themselves for the ceremonial aspects of first contact. There were gifts to arrange, speeches to rehearse, and cultural briefings to review based on the limited information they had gathered from intercepted human broadcasts. The humans were a curious species, Yunseo reflected as they reviewed the data. They had evolved on a world that seemed almost hostile to intelligent life, a planet of extreme temperatures and violent weather patterns and predators that made the Velthrani shudder to imagine, and yet they had not only survived but thrived, spreading across their world and eventually reaching for the stars with a determination that bordered on obsession. "Their space station is quite impressive for such a young species," Minjun observed as they approached the massive structure orbiting the 4th planet. "Though I noticed they have positioned it in a rather defensive location behind their asteroid belt." Yunseo noted the observation but did not comment on it. Many young species were cautious during first contact, and there was nothing inherently suspicious about wanting to meet visitors. Away from one's homeworld, a human shuttle arrived to transport the delegation to the station. A small vessel that seemed almost primitive compared to Velthrani technology, but was clean and well-maintained, and operated with surprising efficiency. The human pilot introduced herself as Captain Suyan and spoke with a warm smile that seemed genuine enough. "The Council is eager to meet you," she said as she guided them through the docking procedures. "And they have prepared a welcome ceremony that we hope will honor your traditions while sharing some of our own." The station's interior was a marvel of practical engineering, all clean lines and functional spaces that spoke of a species that valued efficiency over aesthetics. Human workers paused in their tasks to stare at the Velthrani delegation with expressions that ranged from curiosity to barely concealed excitement. Children pressed their faces against windows to catch a glimpse of the alien visitors, and somewhere in the distance Yunseo could hear music playing, a strange but not unpleasant melody that seemed to celebrate their arrival. The welcome ceremony was everything Captain Suyan had promised, and more human diplomats greeted them with formal bows and carefully rehearsed phrases in the Velthrani language, their pronunciation imperfect but their effort sincere. There were speeches about hope and cooperation, and the bright future that awaited both species as partners in the grand adventure of existence. Yunseo responded with equal grace, speaking of the Velthrani's long history of peaceful expansion and their commitment to helping young species find their place among the stars. The humans listened with rapt attention, their eyes bright with what appeared to be genuine wonder and gratitude. But as the ceremony continued, and the formal exchanges gave way to more casual conversation, Yunseo began to notice small details that seemed out of place. The human diplomats were friendly but careful, always steering conversations away from certain topics and exchanging glances that suggested unspoken communication. Military personnel were present in numbers that seemed excessive for a peaceful ceremony, and their eyes never stopped scanning the room even as they smiled and nodded along with the festivities. Most troubling of all was what Minjun discovered when he ran a routine sensor sweep of the space surrounding the station. "Counselor," he whispered, pulling Yunseo aside during a break in the proceedings, "I am detecting gravitational anomalies in multiple locations around our vessel and the station itself." "What kind of anomalies?" Yunseo asked, keeping their voice low and their expression neutral. "The kind that should not exist in empty space," Minjun replied, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and fascination. "Unless that space is not actually empty." Yunseo felt a chill run through their body, despite the comfortable temperature of the station. Gravitational anomalies of that nature could only mean one thing, and it was a possibility that the counselor had never seriously considered during a first contact mission. "Continue monitoring, but do not attempt any active scans," Yunseo instructed, "and say nothing to the others until we know more." The remainder of the ceremony passed in a blur as Yunseo struggled to maintain their composure while their mind raced through the implications of what Minjun had discovered. The humans continued to smile and offer toasts of friendship and cooperation, but now every gesture seemed calculated and every word seemed chosen with suspicious precision. When the formal events concluded and the delegation was escorted to their quarters for rest, Yunseo found sleep impossible. They stood at the window of their chamber and stared out into the darkness of space, knowing now that the darkness was not as empty as it appeared. Somewhere out there, hidden by technology that should not exist in the hands of such a young species, something was watching and waiting. The peaceful first contact that had begun with such promise now felt like something else entirely. A carefully constructed stage on which the Volthrani were playing parts in a drama they did not fully understand, and as the station's lights dimmed for the night cycle and silence fell over the corridors, Counselor Yunseo could not shake the feeling that the real show had not yet begun. The morning cycle brought fresh anxieties as Counselor Yunseo gathered the delegation for a private meeting in their quarters before the day's negotiations were scheduled to begin. Minjun had spent the night analyzing the gravitational anomalies with every passive sensor at his disposal, and his findings were both remarkable and deeply unsettling. "There are at least 12 distinct signatures," he reported, his voice hushed even though they had swept the room for listening devices, each one consistent with a vessel of considerable size hiding behind some form of light-bending technology. The other members of the delegation exchanged worried glances, their confidence in the peaceful nature of this mission rapidly evaporating. "Perhaps there is an innocent explanation," suggested Elder Hannah, the oldest member of the group and a veteran of countless diplomatic missions. "Perhaps these are simply observation vessels meant to monitor the first contact for historical purposes. Observation vessels do not typically require weapons-grade power signatures," Minjun replied grimly, "and these ships are running hot enough to fight a small war." Yunseo raised a hand to silence the growing murmur of concern that rippled through the delegation. "We will proceed with caution, but we will not abandon this mission based on suspicion alone," the counselor declared. "The humans have shown us nothing but kindness, and we owe them the opportunity to explain themselves before we assume the worst." The day's negotiations took place in a grand conference chamber that the humans had decorated with artwork from both species, a gesture of cultural appreciation that would have seemed touching under different circumstances. Human diplomats filled one side of the long table, while the Velthrani occupied the other. And for several hours, they discussed trade agreements and technological exchanges and the possibility of establishing permanent embassies on each other's worlds. Throughout the proceedings, Yunseo watched the humans carefully for any sign of deception or hidden agenda. They seemed sincere in their desire for friendship, eager to learn about the galaxy and share their own culture with their new Velthrani allies. But the counselor could not forget what lay hidden in the space around them. Silent and deadly and waiting for purposes unknown during a break in the negotiations, Minjun excused himself to use the facilities, and instead made his way to a quiet observation lounge where he could run more detailed scans without attracting attention. He had just begun his analysis when a voice spoke from behind him, calm and measured, and entirely too close for comfort. "You have been very curious about the space around our station," the voice said, and Minjun turned to find a human male standing in the doorway, wearing the uniform of a military officer and regarding him with eyes that seemed to see everything. "I am merely conducting routine scientific observations," Minjun replied, forcing his voice to remain steady despite the fear that gripped his heart. "You are scanning for our cloaked vessels," the officer said, not as an accusation, but as a simple statement of fact. "And you have been doing so since last night when you first detected the gravitational anomalies." Minjun felt the blood drain from his face as he realized that the humans had been monitoring him all along, watching him watch them in a game of observation that he had already lost. "My name is Admiral De Young," the officer continued, stepping into the room and allowing the door to close behind him. "And I think it is time we had an honest conversation about why those ships are out there." The Admiral's words brought Minjun to the conference chamber, where Counselor Yunseo and the rest of the delegation waited with expressions of barely controlled alarm. Admiral De Young stood before them without apology or shame, his posture straight and his gaze unwavering as he addressed the assembled Velthrani. "You came to us in peace, and we have responded in kind," he began, his voice carrying the weight of someone accustomed to giving difficult orders. "But you have also discovered that we did not come to this meeting unarmed, and you deserve to know why." "Then explain," Yunseo said, their voice steady despite the tension that filled the room. "Explain why a species seeking peaceful contact would surround their guests with hidden warships." Admiral De Young nodded as if he had expected exactly this response. "Because the galaxy is not as peaceful as your people believe it to be," he said. "And we learned that lesson long before we ever met you." He gestured to a display screen on the wall, and images began to appear showing intercepted communications and intelligence reports that painted a picture far darker than anything the Velthrani had imagined. "There is a species called Decloaked Dominion," the Admiral explained. "An empire built on conquest and slavery that has been expanding through this region of space for centuries. The Velthrani knew of the Decloaked only as distant rumors, a boogeyman that other species whispered about, but that had never threatened Velthrani territory. The Decloaked have been watching your approach to our system since you entered this sector," Admiral De Young continued, "and they have positioned scout ships at the edge of our solar system, waiting to see what happens here." "Waiting for what?" Elder Hannah asked, though her voice suggested she already suspected the answer. "Waiting to capture your delegation and enslave your crew before you can establish an alliance with humanity," the Admiral replied. "And waiting to learn our weaknesses so they can do the same to us." The room fell silent as the weight of his words settled over the Velthrani like a shroud. "We had three choices when we learned of the Decloaked presence," Admiral De Young said. "We could cancel this meeting and lose any chance of friendship with your people. We could come to you defenseless and pray that the Decloaked would show mercy. Or we could come prepared to protect both our peoples from those who would do us harm." He turned to face Counselor Yunseo directly, His eyes filled with something that looked almost like regret. "We chose to come prepared," he said. "And we chose not to tell you because we did not want fear to poison our first meeting." Yuncio stared at the human admiral for a long moment, processing everything they had heard and trying to reconcile it with everything they had believed about this mission. "Show us," the counselor finally said. "Show us what you have been hiding, Admiral." De Jing nodded once and spoke a single word into his communicator outside the station's windows. Space itself seemed to shimmer and ripple as the cloaking fields dropped and the hidden fleet revealed itself to Velthrani eyes for the first time. At the center of the formation hung a vessel unlike anything the delegation had ever seen. A massive warship bristling with weapons that gleamed in the distant starlight. The unyielding Vigil. Admiral Dayoung said quietly, "Our promise that peace does not mean weakness." Counselor Yuncio stared at the battleship and felt their understanding of humanity shift in ways they could not yet fully comprehend.